Okay.
Okay. And we can start, Marta.
Okay. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Welcome to a conversation amongst activists, people who are concerned about our well-being, about our African descendancy, about our being present and visible. And we're focused on the conference, the UN World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerances that happened in 2001 in Durban, South Africa. And one of the reasons that we are having this conversation is because I've had the good fortune of talking to a lot of young people. And when I mentioned Durban, it's a blank. And I reached out to James and I said, what's happening? Maybe I'm out of the loop. I'm not doing, why am I not connecting? And young people not connecting what happened in Durban, because it marked my life in very definite ways. And we decided to bring together people who were there, people who were instrumental in making the conference happen, and take a look at 20 years after and where we go from here. Because the issues that the conference obviously dealt with are very much present in the United States, Puerto Rico, and globally. So welcome, James.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Marta Vega for her many decades of untiring work.
Decades.
To unite us across Africa and the diaspora, and especially to thank her for convening this group. We convene at a moment in which white supremacy is very crudely and viciously killing us across the world, particularly in the United States and Brazil and Colombia and Haiti. We also convene at a time in which neoliberal capitalism is in dire ethical and functional crisis, and it manifests in new intensified issues of racism in the COVID pandemic among the most vulnerable of working people, particularly Black people, particularly women within that group, and Indigenous people. We also convene at a moment in which the search for alternatives is having to confront racism among progressives, among socialists, not just in capitalist countries. And we unite at a moment in which, in order to get out of this situation, the issue of racism against Afro-descendants must be consistently faced, or there will be no real alternatives. And so it is dependent on us to sum up what happened in Durban, particularly in the pre-conference in Chile, when across ideological and political diversity, gender diversity, sexual identity, ideologies and religion, we forged a positive affirmative project of Afro-descendant citizens under the terminology of Afrodescendientes, which was not a racial identity, but a political project identity, which our comrade, colleague today, panelist Romero Rodriguez, played a very important role in helping us to synthesize our voices. And over the course of the last 20 years, it's important that we sum up what we achieved, what was not achieved, what are the remaining challenges, and particularly to look at the development of reparatory justice, the center of global activity of which is to be found among Afro-Caribbean peoples and Afro-Caribbean countries, particularly within Caricom. We have a limited amount of time, so debemos presentar con mucha disciplina directamente con nuestros puntos a permitir todos a participar.
Le quiero dar la bienvenida a todos, porque no lo dije en español, pero la bienvenida a todos, porque estamos haciendo un análisis, ¿verdad? De los 20 años que han pasado, para uno ver cómo seguimos adelante. So, le quiero presentar a un amigo, activista, profesor, músico, y una persona que ha sido activista y ha estado presente en todas las luchas que se han dado internacionalmente. So, Chucho García, bienvenido.
Muchas gracias, Marta. Muchas gracias, James, por esta iniciativa. Ambos amigos desde hace muchísimos años y que nos hemos encontrado siempre en la lucha por esto. Antes, yo creo que ver la agenda ahorita hacia adelante, yo creo que es bueno que el público que esté escuchando esto también conozca algunos antecedentes. En primer lugar, estamos hablando de la tercera conferencia contra la discriminación racial, la xenofobia y su forma conexa, como decía Marty James, realizada hace 20 años. Pero tenemos que dar una perspectiva de que esta tercera conferencia marcó una diferencia de la perspectiva de los movimientos sociales, una diferencia muy marcada con lo que fue las dos conferencias antes sobre el racismo, que fue en 1978, que fue una batalla que allí se impulsó también la lucha contra el colonialismo en África y en América Latina y las islas del Caribe. Y la otra fue de 1983, que estuvo muy enfocada contra el régimen del Apartheid, ¿no? Pero esta que se dio en el 2001 tuvo como una agenda muy especial y con mucha conciencia de los movimientos sociales. Recuerdo que con Romero, de Mundo Afro, habían varias tendencias en América Latina de los movimientos afro en América Latina. Y recuerdo que en el Valle del Chota, a finales de la década del 80, del 90, hicimos como una especie de una línea estratégica y buscar la unidad con la perspectiva de ir a Durban con una agenda en común. Esto fue muy importante en esa reunión del Valle del Chota. Participó el PCN, el Proceso de Comunidades Negras de Colombia, la Fundación Afroamérica, que yo presidí aquí en Venezuela, así como Mundo Afro, y el Movimiento Francisco Congo. Eso permitió un poco autorreconocernos en una agenda en común a nivel de América Latina y el Caribe. A partir de allí, comenzamos a reconocernos en las luchas, a autorreconocernos en una lucha contra el colonialismo, contra las barreras que impedían hasta cierto punto una sociedad más igualitaria. Posteriormente, en ese trajinar, fuimos como atando cabo hasta llegar a las preconferencias, que fueron 5 preconferencias que se dieron a nivel continental, pero específicamente la de América, que fue donde incluso los gobiernos poco reconocían el problema del racismo. Pero fue en Chile, con iniciativa de la Fundación Ideas y de los movimientos sociales, donde vamos a converger los diferentes liderazgos y lideresas para autodefinir, crear un autoconcepto. Y fue allí el autoconcepto que nosotros creamos, no fue ni el gobierno, no fueron ni los partidos políticos, no fue la academia, fuimos nosotros desde adentro que creamos el concepto afrodescendiente. Pero crear ese concepto en diciembre del 2000 implicaba que teníamos como un año para preparar una agenda ya hacia Durban. Eso de nuevo volvimos a hacer los recorridos, Costa Rica, Uruguay, Ecuador, Colombia, para ir estructurando esa agenda. Y es allí cuando va a surgir esto que se llamó la Alianza Estratégica Afro-Latinoamericana, que también tuvo una coincidencia con una iniciativa que tuvo Marta Moreno Vega, que se llamó GALSI, y también ya la iniciativa que para ese entonces habíamos conocido a Jane cuando estaba funcionando con Trans-African Forum. Eso fue como dando esos elementos y desde allí, de esa plataforma de Chile, vamos a ir con un plan de acción a Durban. Un plan de acción desde la perspectiva de nosotros y nosotras. Y así llegamos a Durban. Un poco como decía Romero, bueno, entramos como negros y salimos como afrodescendientes de Durban. Y allí prácticamente en esa conferencia estructuramos nuestro plan, que está muy marcado aquí, y ustedes, aquellos que no conocen la historia, deben buscar aquí, que aquí en este plan de acción está un capítulo especial sobre afrodescendientes. Pero, ¿qué pasó en la conferencia? En la conferencia se agrega un elemento para los movimientos sociales, que era el tema de las reparaciones. y comenzamos en medio de la conferencia a exigir el tema de las reparaciones, a exigir que tenía que indemnizarse, ¿no?, por ese terrible comercio que se llamó la trata negrera, que luego la conferencia lo calificó como crimen de lesa humanidad, y así como pagar por los daños, las reparaciones por la esclavitud. Eso, por supuesto, a los representantes en esa conferencia, que fueron países y estados que practicaron la trata y la esclavitud, ellos deciden retirarse. Deciden retirarse por el tema del compromiso. Por ejemplo, en Jamaica, que eso después lo va a hablar, creo que David Commission, que acaba de finalizar ahora una conferencia en el Caribe sobre el tema de las reparaciones, habían que cancelar aproximadamente 21.000 millones de la moneda de Inglaterra. Entonces, ese tema fue esencial. A partir de allí comienza una agenda hacia adelante, lo que podríamos decir. En los primeros años, recuerdo que Carlos Rosero, un compañero abogado de Estados Unidos, ¿no?, asistíamos permanentemente a Ginebra para impulsar lo que posteriormente se llama el Grupo de Trabajo Afrodescendiente, que unos años después lo va a dirigir la doctora Mireille Fanon. Pero allí estamos pendientes de cómo se iba a implementar los 4 espacios que habíamos creado en Durban. Primero, un relator contra el racismo, que en ese momento lo estuvo ocupando Dudu Dian, senegalés. Posteriormente, un grupo de personalidades, donde recuerdo que estaba la doctora Edna Roland, de Brasil. Luego, el grupo de trabajo, que en primer lugar estuvo dirigido por un señor de Zambia, de apellido Kukanda, y luego el Comité Intergubernamental para Seguimiento a Durban. De esas 4 instancias, la que fue más consecuente fue el grupo de trabajo de Durban. Y ese grupo de trabajo tuvimos muchos intercambios.
Jesús, vamos a hacer una pausa y seguimos elaborando, pero quiero entrar con Palmira Ríos, profesora de la Universidad de Puerto Rico, Río Piedras, to begin giving us some context in terms of what happened in Geneva, right? Because that was the beginning point of the idealization or the configuration of what would become the conference. So you're telling us, y está compartiendo con nosotros, que hubo organización en Latinoamérica general en distintos lugares. Y cómo lo que pasó en Ginebra, porque cuando estaba hablando con Palmira, dijo que pasaron ciertas cosas clave que también se tienen que entender. So what happened in Geneva, Palmira?
En primer lugar, saludos a todos y a todas por participar en este conversatorio. Es un placer verlos nuevamente. Para entender lo que ocurrió en Durban como la base también de las luchas y los procesos actuales, hay que entender el camino hacia Durban y las complejidades, los conflictos que se dieron y también los logros que nos marcaron. La conferencia hacia Durban requirió 3 conferencias preparatorias, 3 sesiones preparatorias que se celebraron en Ginebra, varias conferencias interseccionales, varias conferencias nacionales y regionales. Además, entonces, las 4 conferencias regionales que incluían tanto a las ONG como a los estados o los gobiernos. En el caso de las conferencias de Ginebra, las preconferencias, donde se iba a preparar la agenda, yo siempre lo confieso que para mi sorpresa en la primera, los que estábamos allí lo recordarán, no estaba asegurado de que el tema de los afrodescendientes se iba a incluir. Lo que sonaba muy extraño porque una conferencia contra el racismo, la discriminación racial, la xenofobia y formas conexas de intolerancia que pretendiera soslayar o poner eso a un lado, realmente inaceptable. Lo que fue para mí una gran lección de que nuestras luchas no podemos tomarlas por sentado, de que eso es un proceso que tiene que ser continuo y que debemos siempre estar muy claros sobre cuál es la agenda, qué es lo que vamos a estar proponiendo y demandando. Así que todo el trabajo que hicieron los compañeros y las compañeras a través y durante este proceso es fundamental para poder entender los logros que se alcanzaron, no solamente de Durban, pero inclusive previo a Durban, la conferencia de Santiago, la conferencia de las Américas, donde, por ejemplo, como ya mencionó Chucho, Jesús García, de que allí se adoptó se acuñó el término afrodescendiente, a pesar de que muchos estados temían que eso abría la puerta a las demandas por reparaciones y hubo una gran resistencia por parte de los estados. Inclusive la Conferencia de las Américas, el país donde originalmente se iba a celebrar, Brasil, suena extraño hoy, pero Brasil rehusó ser la sede de la conferencia, ¿no? Un país con más de 50% de población afrodescendiente y no quiso ser la sede de la conferencia. Igual, de hecho está viendo un trabajo sobre todo este proceso. El Instituto Interamericano de Derechos Humanos, que aunque sí auspició una reunión de los afrodescendientes de las Américas, tampoco no aceptó ser el coordinador de la conferencia y entonces es que pasa esa dirección a la Fundación Ideas y al compañero Francisco Esteves. Pero los estados, los gobiernos, cuando finalmente acceden a tener la Conferencia de las Américas y auspiciarla y apoyarla, lo hacen alegando de que era para evitar que ese flagelo, que ese cáncer de racismo llegara a nuestras costas. Algo que ya lleva más de 500 años de existencia. O sea, es parte de esa negación histórica del racismo en las Américas que ha prevalecido y que es parte de la lucha que todavía continuamos llevando a cabo. De hecho, uno de los instrumentos que se utilizó para tratar de minimizar o controlar la participación de las ONG, porque esta conferencia sí promovió la participación de las ONG en todo el proceso, en todo el camino, fue tratar de limitar el reconocimiento y las acreditaciones de estas organizaciones. Y para que tengan un ejemplo del caso, el caso del gobierno de Paraguay, que vetó la acreditación de la organización afro-paraguaya, Kumbaya, alegando de que en Paraguay no hay racismo, por ende no pueden haber organizaciones de afrodescendientes. Ese es el tipo de pensamiento, ¿no? Pero también es importante saberlo y conocer que eso fue parte de la historia, porque esos mismos estados salen de Santiago reconociendo en la documentación de que existen poblaciones afrodescendientes en todas las Américas, que no hay territorio en las Américas sin población afrodescendiente. Segundo, que sí existe la discriminación racial y el racismo en las Américas y por ende que hay una obligación de todos los gobiernos de combatirlo. Así que esa es la importancia de Santiago y con esa agenda que se gestó allí, inclusive se identificaron cuáles eran las áreas prioritarias de lucha. Como puertorriqueña siempre recuerdo la gran satisfacción de que se incluyó la lucha contra la Marina de los Estados Unidos en Vieques como parte de esas luchas prioritarias, pero igualmente la lucha contra el Plan Colombia, pues, a favor de la lucha de los hermanos y las hermanas en Chiapas. Pero todo este reconocimiento no vino de forma gratuita ni fácil, fue una lucha constante que se lleva entonces a Durban y de hecho las personas que han analizado este proceso reconocen que también salimos de Durban, los y las afrodescendientes como un tema medular de las luchas de política pública. Así que realmente el trabajo que se hizo ahí ha sido la base no solamente para Durban, pero también para la agenda del decenio. Y todavía tenemos también que insertar la agenda específica de los afrodescendientes en la agenda de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible 2030, donde todavía no estamos incluidos allí explícitamente. Así que estos logros de Durban, que muchos tratan hoy de soslayar por todo el conflicto palestino, por el hecho de que los organizadores invitaron para el cierre de la conferencia de ONG a un jefe de Estado, a Fidel Castro. Todo ese, y que pocos días después fueron los ataques de septiembre 11, que tratan de poner a Durban y sus logros a un lado. Realmente tenemos que rescatarlo.
Thank you, Palmira. I think that, can you sort of surmise what happened in Geneva in English? Because I think we have some English speakers listening in. So maybe you can give us a quick synopsis of what you said.
Okay, there were 3 conferences, preparatory conferences that were held in Geneva in planning for the Durban conference. In addition to those, there were intersessional conference and regional conferences. In the Geneva, I was pointed out that during the first conference, we found out that there was little interest in addressing or including in the agenda the issue of peoples of African descent or racial discrimination against peoples of African descent. And it really required a lot of mobilization and work on the part of our colleagues. Many of them are part of this panel, and bring the work they were developing previously to ensure that that was part of the agenda. And that was the basis for which the work that took place also in Santiago at the Regional Conference of the America, where that agenda was kind of finalized, and then we were able to bring it into Durban. So I think the point I was trying to make before is that our demands, our struggle cannot be taken for granted. At any point, they can be put aside, and that was a very good example and lesson that we have to be ready to demand, make our demands clear. And that was a very good case in point that it took the mobilization of everybody that was there, at least the peoples of African descent, because there were some people who were very happy with leaving us outside of the agenda, to make sure that our demands were part of the agenda and the plan for action moving on to Durban.
Thank you, Palmira. One of the most important developments that came out of Durban started in Chile in 2000, when we came together across the Americas with different languages, religions, ideologies, and politics, trying to forge a political project. And that project was forged under the title of Afro Descendants, which then gained a currency literally across the world in documents of nations and states. Romero Rodriguez from Uruguay was the one who helped to synthesize the various presentations. Romero Rodriguez de Uruguay era el que conceptualizó la terminología de afrodescendiente, reflejando las varias perspectivas de nuestros intercambios en Chile. Romero Rodriguez, your time to speak. Please, Romero. Romero.
Micrófono.
No. Micrófono. Romero.
No se oye.
¿Ahora?
Sí, ahora sí.
Ahora
Muchas
sí.
gracias, compañeros. Es un placer reverlos a todos y es un grato honor que me hayan invitado. Yo quiero 4 elementos muy precisos para no perder la perspectiva de que esto es hecho con hombres y mujeres. Y hay una persona que la quiero recordar, que se llama Michael Turner, hoy fallecido. Este hombre fue una de las piezas fundamentales para llegar a Durban, porque fue la persona que nos acercó en aquellos momentos los recursos para llegar a Durban, los recursos para llegar a Chile, los recursos para llegar a Costa Rica, a Brasil. Si no hubiese sido Michael Turner, ese excelente compañero y profesor, yo no sé si hoy estaríamos hablando de todo esto. Por lo tanto, lo quiero recordar para que quede en la historia de lo que hoy se escribe. Como segundo elemento, nos posibilitó conocernos, hallar compañeros y hoy amigos, como James, como tú, Marta, como Humberto, Chucho, Palmira. Hoy somos una familia extendida en el continente, que no hemos perdido lo principal que tiene un activista afrodescendiente, que es, punto número 1, la solidaridad, el reconocimiento y la humildad. Con estos 3 elementos seguimos peleando después de 20 años atrás. Yo me siento muy complacido en haber trabajado y seguir trabajando con ustedes. Lo que dijo Palmira y Chucho fue así. No habría mucho más para agregar el proceso, pero quiero destacar un elemento que para algunos fue lo gravitante. Es que el movimiento afrodescendiente de las Américas llegó con un programa. No llegamos porque éramos negros solamente. un programa. La inteligencia negra se vio en esos años. Hay que tener en cuenta eso, porque movimientos negros existían, muy heroicos, con batallas, algunas ganadas y otras perdidas, pero con un programa continental, desde la Patagonia hasta el norte, hasta Canadá, nunca había existido, en una conferencia que se tornó en su proceso la geopolítica de del mundo. Digo, Palmira lo decía muy bien, ni tenían en cuenta a los afrodescendientes. No éramos actores gravitantes en la geopolítica del momento. El problema eran otros, Palestina, la inmigración. Recuerdo en las reuniones con la señora Mary Robinson, el tema era que América Latina apoyara a la tercera conferencia mundial contra el racismo para hacer un colchón de atajo al problema de inmigrantes que tenía Europa. O sea, fue el primer problema en el siglo XXI, finales del siglo XX, un problema geopolítico. Y como todo problema geopolítico, algunos países, los gobiernos de las Américas los encontraron totalmente desguarnecidos. Ellos tenían un argumento: hacer la conferencia para que no viniese el racismo que existía en otras partes. Fue la mayor ingeniería política de los últimos 20 años o a principios de este siglo, como ingeniería, donde los actores fueron los descendientes y fundamentalmente las organizaciones. Bien lo dijo Chucho recién. Ahí no había academia, ¿eh? Las universidades no eran aliados. No teníamos aliados. El concepto intelectual no formaba parte de los seres negros, de las negras y de los negros. Digo, ese cambio que se produce es parte del movimiento afrodescendiente. Países importantes, lo dijo Palmira, países importantes que nunca pensamos, con gobiernos progresistas que iban a asediar la conferencia, nos dijeron que no en último momento. Digo, y todos los avances que han habido salen a partir del 75% de lo escrito en el libro que presentó Chucho, que fueron de la inteligencia latinoamericana y caribeña. Atentamente observen ese libro, eso salió de la inteligencia de los pueblos afrodescendientes y de los movimientos y de las organizaciones. Yo rindo un tributo a las organizaciones.
Eso.
Porque las organizaciones fueron las que pusieron el tema arriba de la mesa. O nos olvidamos las discusiones que teníamos con el movimiento indígena. Profundas discusiones con el movimiento indígena. Hoy, por suerte, hay coincidencia, hay consenso. Pero teníamos una agenda que definimos buena parte de nuestro siglo. Y este es el peligro que hoy, y termino, que hoy corremos. Que nuestra agenda se diluya en un negrismo y no en una situación política de cambio y transformación. Ese es el problema que hoy tenemos arriba de la mesa. Hoy han aparecido nuevas contradicciones. No, con asombro mucha gente ve lo que sucedió en las últimas elecciones en Estados Unidos, donde 40 y pico % de la población afroestadounidense vota a Trump. Esos son los análisis que debemos hacer, de donde la contradicción que existe hoy arriba de la mesa o que nos están imponiendo es o luchar por la igualdad o luchar por la libertad, como si fuese cosas contrapuestas. Entonces el movimiento negro, retomando Durban, tenemos que conseguir, las nuevas generaciones conseguirán nuevos paradigmas de acción en base a lo que se consiguió en Sudáfrica y fundamentalmente en Chile. Esos
Vamos a
paradigmas
pausar
es
un
la
momentito
construcción.
y
Y
abrir.
para finalizar y no usar más el tiempo, agradecerte, Marta, agradecer a mis amigas y amigos de mi militancia. He aprendido con ustedes y sigo aprendiendo. Y felicito a los compañeros del Caribe que están poniéndole el tema de las reparaciones, que lo estamos siguiendo con mucha atención. Estamos aprendiendo, porque también es cierto que esa agenda está presente, pero hay que aprender de esa agenda que no está muy profundizada en América Latina. Gracias, Marta, y gracias a...
No, gracias, Romero. That you bring a very important point about the building of our organizations. Las organizaciones que apoyaron todo este movimiento fueron ONG independientes, ¿verdad? Con la inteligencia nuestra. Que eso también es bien importante. Gracias por hablar sobre eso, porque la gente piensa que la inteligencia solamente está en la universidad y no está mirando los pueblos y la inteligencia que existe en nuestro pueblo, en la creación de nuestras inteligencias, mirando para la libertad, ¿verdad? So, en este sector nos gustaría no tener a Rosa, a Humberto, Haikali, entrar y hablar, like, what took you to Durban? What was the thing that motivated? Because I know we weren't funded to go. So, and the United States part, we all decided we would go, those of us who were residing within the United States. And what propelled you to go? Rosa? Rosa is a doctorate candidate at Amherst at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center.
Yeah, and it's funny because Dr. Matos is on, Dr. Augustine Matos, and he's on my committee and been waiting forever. So I told you, I'm trying to finish this PhD, fam. But first I want to say what a blessing it is to be with just brilliant people, mentors, elders, what it means to be on at this time, and with my comrade colleague. Like, I'm actually very sad that so many people don't know what happened in Durban, but what brought me there was we were in the height of organizing, in New York City. Richie Perez was alive. He had us in coalitions with the Malcolm X Grassroots movement, CAV, so many other organizations and people. And I clearly remember it was Ajin Poo was like, we can get out there and we can get out there. And once we started fundraising and all of that, we were able to go. So we went as this delegation of mostly young folks under 35 as Third World Within. And then I also played a role in the Black August concerts that Malcolm X Grassroots movement was putting on. And we did 5 shows out there during this time period where we brought hip hop artists like the Boots, Talib Kweli, Dead Prez, and then artists from the different places we went to in South Africa. Should I go and do my part, or that was?
Go ahead.
Okay, so, for me, this conference changed my life in 2 ways. I had never been to the continent, so that alone was a very important experience for me. I was like, I'm gonna get to go at this conference, but I have to just stand still for a minute and take this in and what it means, and not knowing anything about South Africa except for what we read. And as soon as we were in the youth conference, there were already problems. A lot of South African young people were not being allowed into the conference. There was a lot of security and gates to get in, but we were part of the youth part of the conference. And within that, I was then on the reparations. I was one of the people picked to be on reparations from the Third World Within Coalition, because we all went to different parts. So it was there that I finally got to see other African descendant people from other countries be like, no, we're Black, we're African descendant, this is what's going on. And also to check our American privilege, right? Because you think you're so open, and then you go to a place like this and you begin to act like an American, like things are slow, where's the food? And it's like all those things for me were happening in real time. And also supporting the young people from Puerto Rico and from the United States that were Puerto Rican that were fighting against and wanting the US Navy to leave Vieques, you know, and confronting Mary Robinson. In the last day of the youth conference before Fidel Castro spoke, we were inside and we shut down Mary Robinson over not only that, but also it was my first time hearing about Palestinian human rights and Dalit people and Roma people. So all of these things for me were exciting. They were new. They were like, this is what it means to be in international solidarity. Everything you learned in Black studies is happening right here, practically. And as we continued to meet, then we began to go to other parts of the conference. And the part I'll never forget, besides hearing Fidel Castro speak for 3 hours and somehow me getting in the media pool without a pass, I had a camera and I was like, can I just sit here? And I have he spoke to the youth for 3 hours in an outside stadium. But we were in a workshop with Maita and at that time, Assemblyman Roger Green. And then all of a sudden somebody was like, the United States is walking out. They're leaving the conference. And what a lot of people don't know is that the United States did not send any high level folks. They sent like Colin Powell should have been there, right? You know, he should have been at that seat where all these other leaders from around the world were. And I just remember, I swear, I remember Maita being like, we're marching. And we go outside, the sun is still on, and you just see all the other groups and organizations and just this mass of people, and us really being like, listen, just because we live in the United States does not mean we agree with any of this. And then there were breakout groups and all of that. So for me, when I left the conference, I left coming back into Brooklyn with my organizing family, Malcolm X Grassroots movement, like the possibilities are endless. We are from around the world. We represent everything that's African and indigenous descent. We are the culture makers, like, yeah. But then I was in Cape Town and Brother Kali, we were the ones that went and did 3 of the Black August conferences. And we were at Cape Town and I woke up one night and I was like, I gotta go. I don't know what's wrong, but I feel the need, I have to leave. And I called my mom and I was like, I need more money. I gotta get out of here. Well, I was on one of the few last flights to land on September 11th. So there were a lot of people from the conference on that flight. And we descended and we saw the first plane hit the World Trade Center. And it was just mad chaotic. And somehow my father found me in all this chaos at the airport. It was like, leave, we gotta go. And then as we were on the Triborough Bridge, that's a bridge in New York City, y'all, where you see clearly, and it was the most clearest, beautiful day. We see the second plane hit. And my dad was like, well, I guess everything you talked about at that conference is not gonna happen because you know that this country is going to go bomb somebody right now. And also we were looking for people. So I went from this moment of like, yes, to like, oh my God, this is not only what the United States is gonna do to bomb someone, what is the NYPD gonna do? And that's what they started doing, surveilling our organizations. 3 of our organizations and coalition were broken into, files were taken, people were being followed and all of that kind of stuff. So with all that said, I find so much inspiration and I am grateful because to me, being around all of you in that moment 20 years ago was a master class of also how you stick to the politics, but you stick to what your ancestors would have done. What I will end with is this. I think a lot of young people don't know about this because they're not supposed to know about it. I think we're living right now in a time where young people are demanding different things than what I was demanding in South Africa with so many other people. Young people I speak to are definitely like their main issue is the climate catastrophe and then the global pandemic. Many of them are falling into serious mental health. Many younger folks are dealing with student loan, lack of health care, seeing their families eviscerated by COVID, now, you know, Ida and the incoming thing. And I think what we need to be doing is making sure that we connect what happened 20 years ago within what we should all be part of, which is the Black radical tradition and revolutionary ways of being in this planet. And lastly, young people don't know how they're going to sustain themselves. They don't know. They don't know if they should go to college. Will they be a job? Automation is happening, climate, state violence, all of these things. And then now this enormous gender violence. And then for younger people, they are sometimes at odds with older folks, which I would put myself in that category, not understanding, unless confronted, about the binaries that they're trying to break around gender and how they are in a world. But I think it is possible for us to have all this stuff intersecting. I just think we have to now do it like how it was done for me, a master class as well as mentorship, and keep talking about our historical conditions, because we're not even supposed to be here now, and we are, and we're not going anywhere.
Thank you, Rosa. So why don't we segue into Kali? So maybe you can fill in some memories that maybe Rosa didn't touch upon. So Kali Akuno, welcome.
Thank you. So many to touch on. Let me see. Let me start with what kind of drew me there. And there was a number of different things that I was kind of commissioned to do, actually. As part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement. There were, I would say, really 4 things that were on my agenda, organizing agenda at the time, and that of the organization that I was a part of that really drew us there. One, and I will put this at the top of the list, was trying to advance the reparations movement and trying to advance the reparations work. I was at the time, one of the representatives of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, out on the West Coast. I was in California at the time, in Oakland, California. And we were part of a broad international dialogue about advancing the reparations movement, centered in the Caribbean, out in the UK, and in Europe. And that was, I think, one of the central times, one of the last times, unfortunately, that level of mass kind of engagement around reparations in all those different areas was occurring. Now, we know that there's still, that work is still going on. There's still many kind of afterlives, if you would, of that, which occurred. But that was one of the major buildups that first kind of put the World Conference Against Racism on my personal radar screen. I think that was right after the meeting in Chile, where we had a big meeting about it, a couple of us organizers in Oakland, California, where I was at the time. Another thread that really brought me there, that we kind of were trying to force, I think, into the conversation, was the Malcolm X grassroots movement was putting together, at that time, we had been working on it for a number of years, an international conference about US held political prisoners, prisoners of war and political exiles, called Tear Down the Walls. And we had got it situated initially that Cuba was going to be the host of this conference. So there would be an international conference that would draw attention, you know, to those in our struggle here in the United States, from the Black Panther Party, from Provisional Governor Republic of New Africa, from the Puerto Rican independence movement, from AIM, the American Indian movement, really highlighting a lot of those folks and others, MOVE organization and others, and really highlighting their struggle. That was the second thread that we were trying to work on. And this conference was supposed to take place in 2002, in May of 2002. And we were going to work hard to really amplify this, recruit some more forces to sign on and to endorse, and to try to make that as much of a mass expression as possible, to kind of lend support to that particular struggle. The other thing that really got me there was a lot of Palestinian, solidarity work, and it was definitely a part of a coalition primarily centered out of California on the West Coast at that time, that was really trying to bring back within the conference, within the space of the World Car, WCAR, the official designation that Zionism is a form of racism, which had been taken off of the books within the UN just a couple of years prior. So trying to reintroduce that as a critical notion to fight against the dispossession of the Palestinian people. So that was a third issue of the coalition I was working with. And then there was our own work, which Rosa spoke to as an organization, which was Black August, and really trying to promote a deep level of kind of cultural exchange and to do a level of political education there. So those are the four things that drew me there personally. And I brought a couple of youth with me, was able to do that. I was teaching high school at the time. So I had to take some time off to be able to go to the World Conference Against Racism at the beginning of the year, because in California, the school year starts in September, and the official conference, not the People's Conference, was held during part of September. And one just closing story, which is similar to Rosa's. We were together for a good part of that time. And I remember making a mad dash to get out of there ahead of time. Well, I was there on September 11th, and I just happened to be, just by random coincidence, getting a tour of Soweto, and just by chance ran into Winnie Mandela giving a tour of her house, to a large delegation of folks who were attending the WCAR. And to show you how sharp the sister's mind was, she had met me, I think, all of maybe 2 hours in Los Angeles, when I was a youth at an event when they were touring through, and was just introduced to her in the context of that meeting. And she remembered the exact meeting. She remembered the place. She remembered who I was, even though this was I think 12 or 14 years later. So I had aged quite a bit, had a long mane full of hair at the time, which would be hard to imagine now. But she remembered me very distinctly. And it was one of her security detail who kept nudging me and saying, you need to go watch the TV. You need to go watch the TV. There's something major going on in your country. And I kept telling him, brother, I don't care what's going on in the United States. I'm hanging out with Winnie and I'm getting a history lesson. I can give a damn about what's happening in that country. He kept saying, look, you need to go check it out. And eventually he came and grabbed me and he said, look at what's going on. So he took me to the chop shop that was right across the street from her house. And I kid you not, I kid the world not, when I first saw the images, I thought what I was seeing was the coup getting major coverage on CNN. And why do I say that? I, like Rosa, know Boots Riley, who was kind of the leader of the coup, and he had just came out in August of 2001 with, I think, his third album, which was called Party Music. And the original cover of that album had the Twin Towers blowing up, right? And so I looked at the brother who was a security detail. I said, oh, that's just my man Boots. His album must be blowing up back up in the States. And he said, no, you're still not paying attention. Pay close attention. And then in the context of going back and forth, I'm trying to explain this album, the first tower falls before me. And it was at that point in time, the first thought that was in my head was our political prisoners and prisoners of war and political exiles are never getting out and never coming home. Just recognizing, what that meant in terms of the might that the U.S. imperialist forces were going to unleash upon the world as a pure act of revenge. And then the second thought was, this is the end of our reparations conversation on the international level and all the work that we just accomplished. And there were some major things, in my view, along the reparations trend that got accomplished, particularly getting the wording in there about slavery being a crime against humanity was one of the major victories that came out of that in terms of the actual text. that was going to be jettisoned, and that the United States was going to take center stage in doing that, to the same way it upstaged the conference by kind of officially stepping away, but influencing its outcomes in the shadows. So just
Thank
a few
you, Kali.
memories and a couple of things to share.
Thank you, Kali. We'll circle back. And I'd like to introduce Humberto Brown, activist. I know a friend, I know him, he nudges me all the time when stuff has to happen. And so I thank him very much for being here. Professor, teacher, focused on medical issues. So Humberto Brown, Panamá.
Buenas, saludos a todos, compañeros y compañeras. Placer verlos. Es mucho tiempo. Pero es un honor ver los rostros y saber que estamos presentes después de tanto tiempo. Do you prefer me to speak in Spanish or English? Or, you know what?
Whatever you prefer. The one thing that we have to learn is that we have to speak a lot of languages because we're global.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's telling me, like, what are you going to do? English or Spanish? English or Spanish?
I
said, it doesn't matter. Whoever feels comfortable speaking whatever language is going to have to speak it.
Okay,
and we're all going to have to learn each other's languages if we're going to connect globally. That's a must.
I could do both, but let me see.
So you can do both. It's not a problem. But English works.
Yo comparto todo lo compartido por los compañeros y compañeras que participamos en los procesos iniciales. Yo creo que la complejidad del proceso Durban, aparte de una reunión como esta, requiere que nos sentemos en verdad hacer una evaluación, un análisis más detallados de algunas cosas que son elementales, pero fundamentales, para que podamos no solamente haber aprendido, evaluado, pero también forjar una serie de caminos hacia adelante, inclusive en el poco tiempo que nos queda del decenio de los afrodescendientes dentro del contexto de Naciones Unidas. Yo diría que, aparte de lo que compartieron los compañeros y compañeras, creo que Durban es un proceso que en cierta instancia tiene una variedad. Bob Marley decía que nosotros somos Exodus people, ente de éxodos. Y yo creo que una forma más profunda de definirnos, porque nosotros siempre estamos en movimiento, siempre estamos en distintos espacios y estamos también en procesos transformativos y conscientes colectivamente de nuestra sobrevivencia. Y yo creo que si hablamos algo de Durban, es que tengo que mencionar, por ejemplo, al movimiento 12 de noviembre, December 12, 12 de diciembre. Roger Green, una serie de gente, Gay McDougall, una serie de gente del movimiento surafricano, ANC, la gente de los movimientos de Mozambique, la gente del Caribe, lo que pasó en Grenada, Michael Manley en Jamaica, algunos de nosotros que vivimos en la diáspora, ya estamos metidos. La Palmira Río conoce eso porque ella es parte de esa historia. ¿Cuánto tiempo en Nueva York, en nuestra casa, había juntos un montón de gente de los años 60, 70, de los movimientos de liberación, de otros movimientos, tratando este tema y tratando de continuar lo que es el panafricanismo, que siempre es un río de constancia, de encuentros y reencuentros, si es en Londres, Nueva York, París, construyendo nueva experiencia, pero de algo muy fundamental que yo quiero que no se nos olvide, de recoger las experiencias anteriores de nuestros ancestros y luchadores. Fanon, Dubois. En el momento de la conferencia de Durban, yo voy allá por dos motivos. Uno, por el vínculo obviamente con Latinoamérica, pero yo soy parte del Black Radical Congress, que se crea en 1998 para retomar la tradición radical, del pensamiento radical, donde está surgiendo un movimiento negro muy conservador, muy vinculado a la parte más conservadora del Partido Demócrata, y comenzamos a construir algo con algunos que ya no están, que se fueron ya. que construimos un proyecto en 1998 en Chicago, donde aparecieron casi 5,000 personas en una conferencia que iba a ser de 800, incluyendo la mayoría jóvenes. Y digo eso porque de ahí surge la necesidad de un planteamiento radical negro, no tradicional, sino antisexista, antihomofóbico, con nuevos planteamientos de crítica imperialista que conecta un momento histórico donde gente que no están ahora, que murieron, Lee Mullins, un montón de gente que estuvieron en este proceso. Entonces, yo quiero decir que lo que sale es la confluencia de distintas corrientes y experiencias, la de Latinoamérica que Romero y Chucho explicaron muy bien, pero que viene también del Caribe. El Caribe es un asunto donde nosotros que estuvimos en Grenada, que estuvimos en Jamaica con Manley, que estuvimos y de África, porque algunos estuvimos vinculados al asunto de Sudáfrica y el movimiento de apoyo en este país que fue fuertísimo. Entonces digo eso porque yo creo que hay una confluencia muy fuerte que crea Durban, el nivel de conciencia, de inteligencia, de unidad en la diversidad. El centro, yo creo que yo quiero llamar la atención para cuando nos estamos moviendo al futuro. Teníamos movimientos, tenía gente en distintos lugares, intelectuales, en academia, en gobierno. Lo importante es que estamos volviendo a hacer algo que Malcolm planteó Dubois, de que esa institución, Nación Unida, debía ser una plataforma donde nosotros llevamos el asunto nuestro para luchar por el beneficio de los negros a nivel global. Cuando Malcolm habla ya no solamente de derechos civiles, sino de los derechos humanos de los afrodescendientes. Entonces yo digo eso porque eso nos creó la unidad, donde la gente que tenía experiencia como December 12 o Gay McDougall y un montón de gente del movimiento caribeño habían trabajado Nación Unida, habían empujado, habían intentado lo de Apartheid y las dos otras conferencias. Esta vez nos unimos con toda la experiencia para forzar una agenda más avanzada. Y yo resumiría que lo que Durban fue muy importante para nosotros porque demostró lo que decíamos anteriormente, una agenda impulsada por movimientos sociales con toda la experiencia histórica, lo que implicaba el racismo en la diversidad de nuestra experiencia. A mí me tocó participar de ser parte de la Comisión África Afrodescendiente y tener que manejar África, la experiencia europea, la africana, la de los Estados Unidos, la de Europa. ¿Cómo manteníamos unidad en esa diversidad? Y para mí Durban fue una escuela de cómo nosotros logramos una unidad. Y no siempre teníamos en toda la agenda, y lo que ustedes mencionaron, el tema de reparaciones, el tema de la inclusión de sectores que históricamente habían sido discriminados, el tema de entender proyectos sociales que tenían capacidad transformadora. Entonces yo creo que fue muy importante porque nos permitió unirnos en un espacio que no todos teníamos experiencia y forzar una agenda común a través del mundo, no solamente de las Américas, sino de África, de Europa, los africanos y los caribeños en Londres. Estábamos en Londres a cada rato tratando de mantener esa unidad en París y logramos eso en Durban con todos los desafíos que eso implicaba. Entonces yo creo que esto requiere de un momento de reflexión, porque yo creo que logramos algo muy profundo en eso. Yo además, y trato de resumir después, creo que Romero y también Palmiano lo mencionó, y Chucho, nosotros entramos a una conferencia que estaba tratando de diluir el tema racial, resistiéndolo, y entonces pusieron otras formas conexas y un montón de lenguaje. Entonces ellos mismos quedaron en una trampa, porque entonces también calificó la cosa de los Dalits, que el gobierno indio no quería para nada. También calificó a la gente roma, también los palestinos, porque se amplió la agenda por un asunto anticolonial y racial también. Y nosotros tuvimos la gran habilidad de no dividirnos, sino unirnos y entrar a unificar todas esas fuerzas y lograr unidad en esa diversidad. Yo siempre me sentí, y Romero y Chuto tuvieron muchas negociaciones con nosotros, donde no podíamos cubrir todas las reuniones y todos los grupos, y pactamos con las organizaciones que si los indígenas estaban en el cuarto, tenían que defender los planteamientos de nosotros, afrodescendientes, reparaciones. Y si nosotros estamos en las negociaciones, defendíamos pueblos indígenas plural, los territorios respetados. Hicimos igual con la ente Dali. Y eso fue una cosa muy importante porque nos convertimos, ampliamos nuestra fuerza. Entonces, yo creo que hay muchas lecciones, no tengo el tiempo para cubrirlo todo, pero fue una lección para nosotros aprender y crear agenda unitaria viniendo de experiencias muy separadas. Lo que tuvimos metido en las negociaciones, ¿saben cuántas veces yo volví y un par de nosotros a Ginebra para reunir al grupo, para volver a unirnos? ¿Cuántas veces tuvimos que tirarnos a otros países para negociar la unidad de nosotros? Fue un proceso difícil, pero yo creo que si hay algo leccionador, es siempre aprender que nuestros movimientos siempre son heterogéneos en muchas formas, incluyendo ideológicamente y políticamente. Y la madurez del panafricanismo es cómo logramos una agenda que nos lleve a ser transformativo. Y yo creo que Durban marcó un espacio para eso. Si hoy hay un movimiento antirracista,
bueno, gracias, hermano,
no afrodescendientes, nos permite avanzar. Entonces, yo nada más quiero decir, cierro con eso, pero yo creo que a mí me gustaría que nosotros tuviera otro momento para eso. Y acordando que sí hay un montón de logros y hay distintos sectores haciendo distintas cosas. Y que acabamos de conseguir el foro permanente de los pueblos afrodescendientes. Es una plataforma que luchamos por muchos años y hoy tenemos que discutir cómo lo activamos, cómo se vuelve una plataforma política, cómo no se vuelve solamente para danzar y cantar, sino una plataforma de lucha.
Bueno, Humberto,
con esto.
Humberto,
Gracias,
necesitamos, gracias. Two things very important have been mentioned, one about Palestine, in which the conference tried to distract us by upholding the apartheid Israel occupational government and not recognizing the Palestinians. And the other was the refusal to deal with the issue of reparations. And over the last 20 years, the issue of reparations has moved from the margin of discussion to the center of global discussion, with the Caribbean being the center of that. Our brother activist, lawyer, the Honorable Ambassador David Camisong from Barbados, a country that we need to learn more about, and its struggles of uniting Africa and its diaspora, will now bring us a presentation of his participation both in Durban and the activities that are being centered in the Caribbean around reparations that are extending to the entire world. Ambassador David Camisong.
Thank you, James, Martha. Brothers and sisters, it's such a great pleasure to reconnect with so many of you. I only have 5 minutes, so let me get right into it. When we in the Caribbean first heard about this World Conference Against Racism, we recognized that it was an opportunity to put the issue of reparations on the international agenda. I went to the Americas Region Preparatory meeting in Chile in December of 2000 as a member of the Barbados government's delegation. And when we got there with the intention of dealing with reparations, we were confronted by the representatives of the United States of America and Canada, who said to us that this World Conference Against Racism will have nothing to do with reparations. It will have nothing to do with historical slavery, with the transatlantic slave trade, with any notion of slavery being a crime against humanity. And we said to them, you have to be joking. As far as we are concerned, this conference will deal with historical slavery and with reparations. And so we defied them. And as the various preparatory meetings went along at Geneva, it began to become clear to them that they were not going to have their way. That in fact, text relating to reparations was going to be inserted into the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. And that is in fact why they walked out. The United States and Canada walked out of the Durban conference because they did not get their way. And I know this because they said this to me in Santiago de Chile. Fast forward now, so they have always been hostile to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. All of the white countries, United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, there has been 20 years of hostility. In spite of that hostility, on the 22nd of this month, at the United Nations General Assembly, there's going to be a high-level heads of government meeting to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Durban. And the theme of that high-level meeting is reparations, racial justice, and equality for people of African descent. 20 years ago, for the theme of a United Nations high-level meeting to be reparations would have been unheard of. So in spite of their hostility, we have made some progress. Now, yesterday, there was a very important meeting. It was the first African and Caribbean Community Heads of Government Summit. And at that summit, the Caribbean Community Heads of Government put on the table the establishment of a forum of African and Caribbean states. That is going to happen. That forum is going to be established. There's going to be an annual African Caribbean Heads of Government meeting every year on the 7th of September. And 3 of the Caribbean Heads of Government indicated that that forum must deal with reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of African people. Prime Minister Gonzalez of St. Vincent, Prime Minister Gaston Brown of Antigua and Barbuda, the current chair of Caricom, and Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley of Barbados. Prime Minister Motley also called on the African and Caribbean countries to fully participate in the high-level United Nations meeting on the 22nd of September, and to use that meeting to advance the issue of reparations within the United Nations processes. We are also trying to get Sir Hilary Beckles, the chair of the Caricom Reparations Commission, to address that high-level UN meeting on the 22nd of September. Now, the Caricom Reparations Commission was established in 2013. It is one of the fruits of the UN World Conference Against Racism, and it has advanced a 10-point plan, reparations plan, that is very much based on a number of the resolutions to be found in the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. Our thinking right now in the Caribbean is that the way to advance the reparations struggle, the next phase for us is to reach out to Africa and to ask Africa to join the Caribbean community in its reparatory justice campaign. That was done yesterday. So that is ongoing. Part of our thinking is that we have to make the international reparations movement into an international cause célèbre, equal in power and scope and intensity to the anti-apartheid movement of the 1970s and 1980s. So the international struggle has to be, the reparations struggle has to be totally internationalized. It has to be a mass movement, an international mass movement, and it has to have the power of world public opinion on its side. So that is where we are going. The Caricom Reparations Commission, that is our intergovernmental reparations body. Attached to that is the Reparations Research Center at the University of the West Indies, the Mona campus in Jamaica. And the Caricom heads of government have said that the Caricom Reparations Commission can bring on board other reparations entities to give them observer status. So what we have to do, we have to use the Caricom Reparations Commission as a kind of foundation that we will then build upon it and build a worldwide reparations movement. Finally, I want to say that Durban and the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, and this is it here for young people who may have never seen a copy of it. This is the foundation. The work that was done at that World Conference is the foundation for all of these more recent developments in reparations. There are 341 paragraphs in the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, but there are 6 paragraphs that are very critical to the reparations cause. And those paragraphs are paragraph 13 of the Durban Declaration. It is broken into two parts. There's the Durban Declaration, and then there's the Durban Program of Action. So paragraph 13 of the Durban Declaration is what declares slavery and slave trade crimes against humanity, and records that Africans and people of African descent were victims of these acts and continue in the present day to be victims of their consequences. Then paragraph 99 of the Declaration, which calls upon states to honor the memory of victims of those past tragedies. Paragraph 101 of the Declaration, which calls for apologies, the presenting of apologies for those crimes. Paragraph 100 of the Declaration, which also emphasizes apologies. Paragraph 102 of the Declaration, and paragraph 158 of the Durban Plan of Action, which says, and let me just read it quickly, this conference recognizes that these historical injustices have undeniably contributed to the poverty, underdevelopment, marginalization, social exclusion, economic disparities, instability, and insecurity that affect many people in different parts of the world, particularly in developing countries. The conference recognizes the need to develop programs for the social and economic development of these societies and the diaspora within the framework of a new partnership, and it emphasizes debt relief, poverty eradication, agriculture and food security, transfer of technology, investment in health infrastructure, human resources development, education, training and cultural development, restitution of art objects, historical artifacts and documents to their countries of origin, and facilitation of welcome, return, and resettlement of the descendants of enslaved Africans. In other words, repatriation. So the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparations is based very firmly on these kinds of demands. In the Caribbean, we don't see reparations in terms of individual cash payments. We see it more in terms of a reparative restructuring of the international economic and political order, and a developmental compact that because of this history of looting and plundering our people and societies, we now possess a fundamental right to development. And these nations that profited from our underdevelopment, that looted and plundered us, they are subject to a fundamental duty to facilitate our development. So it's all about a reparative restructuring of all of these relationships and of the international economic and political order. So that is the task ahead of us. We have to unite. The Caricom and the Caricom Reparations Commission presents a good foundation around which we can build that broad international reparations movement. Let me end there. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I would like us to push us, right? As we think about these things, and I'm incorporating some of the questions that the audience is putting in. How do you get countries that have been absolutely against, right, reparations? As you mentioned, the European countries, the white countries, right? And we saw that in Durban. Right now in the United States, we're seeing an out and out movement to oppress the vote, to oppress education that reflects our history. And we see that increasingly happening across the world. In Brazil, we see it in Europe, right? This narrowing, right? In reaction to our moving forward. So that how do we connect the levels? Because like Chucho, Romero, también Palmira mentioned civil society as the driving force to what happened in Durban. I mean, there was the officialdom, but there was also the presence of our community, people who were there because we were just tired and not wanting to be silent anymore. Right? So how do we connect those dots? Because yes, Caricom and the officialdom is important, like FC Campbell and all the people that we have in places, but how do you mobilize or continue to energize civil society when so much oppression is on our backs, right? And lack of information, because this is why we called this panel together, because we said, how is it that are young, right? They weren't even born 20, many of them 19 to 18-year-olds who are labeling themselves activists, never heard of Durban, right? So that where do we fill those gaps? What is our responsibility going forward to fill those gaps? So this is a round table. We're in the living room now. So let's figure it out. And of course, we have to come together because you can't organize on Facebook. Let's be clear on that. Okay.
Martha, you want to do a quick translation so that we be assured that all of our other comrades understood your question?
Okay. You want me to translate? Okay. So estoy hablando de que cuando fuimos a Durban, fuimos no como oficiales de gobierno, fuimos como sociedad civil que estaba interesada en cambiar la situación para nuestro pueblo, ¿verdad? Y ahora estamos viendo que en nuestros pueblos, los Estados Unidos, un ejemplo, en Brasil, nos están oprimiendo en una manera que no pensaban los 20 años atrás. Aquí están oprimiendo el voto, están oprimiendo que los estudiantes aprendan sobre la historia del proceso de la esclavitud, ¿verdad? So tenemos, a la misma vez que tenemos gente en posiciones que están hablando sobre reparaciones, están hablando sobre un cambio, tenemos también una reacción bastante violenta contra nuestras comunidades. ¿Y cómo organizamos en estos momentos? ¿Qué hacemos en estos momentos? Para unir lo que está pasando con los gobiernos oficialmente que están apoyando reparaciones, y qué hacemos con un pueblo que está oprimido bastante, porque aquí con el COVID la comunidad que está sufriendo más son las nuestras. So, ¿qué hacemos? ¿Qué son los pasos adelante? So, estamos hablando como amigos, ¿verdad? Porque uno no puede organizar en Facebook, pero vamos a hablar.
Well, I mean, what I would say is that I think internationally, things are moving in a more revolutionary direction, including in Puerto Rico, movements in Chile, in Brazil, you know, like Nigeria, Uganda, there's a lot. But in the United States, there's a complete disconnect with a younger generation. There just is. What their concern right now is, am I going to be able to have a place to live in the future? What's the point of any type of education outside of high school, including trade education, whatever different types of, not just quote, academic higher education? And third, you know, there's no trust in government at all or governing people. So you talking to young people, they don't unfortunately really care about voting rights and what's happening. Talking to younger women today, none of them brought up what the Supreme Court just did around not abortion or reproductive rights. And I think this global pandemic, whatever they thought this country could be, is showing everything we've all said in terms of racism, health disparities, and all of that. And they're in a crisis of not even thinking that tomorrow's a possibility. I think older generations saw the possibilities of a tomorrow. Younger people are like, everything is burning and flooding. Like, what's the sense? And I really think that in any work we do here, the connection has to be that understanding internationalism, understanding that we are not just in this country and part of a greater Black, African, Indigenous, diasporic community, that we also here in the United States have to really be talking about these white supremacists and the attacks that they are beginning to plan, especially post this report that says now that Black and brown people in this country will be the majority 20 years earlier than they thought. And if you look at QAnon, the chatter online, they are preparing like massive type of murders, like El Paso at levels that we couldn't even comprehend. And they're also planning it because they're going to get away with what happened in January 6th. So I think for a lot of young people, there's they don't see a future. That's what it comes down to. They don't see a future at all. It's our job, though, to show them there's many ways of organizing and that we're part of an international world. You know, so how do we bridge that gap with the information? Yeah.
Thank you. Palmira, you deal with young people. What do you see?
Well, actually, I deal with young people here in Puerto Rico that have gone through so much and are so much part of the struggles, of the many struggles that we are engaged in Puerto Rico, that they probably are more aware of the issues and the challenges ahead. And I see a generation that's looking for answers and plans and proposals for change. But also they have a kind of different view with the question of diversities, and I'm using the plural form, is very central. So there's a different kind of approach to struggles and the demand for social change, for recognition of the diversities of equity and inclusion. One thing that I learned from Durban that I think is very pertinent today is the question of recognition and the significance of that we recognize, and the society and the powers that be recognize that we exist, because too many government and cultural organizations and even community-based organizations try to ignore that we exist, that we are not a minority. I mean, sometimes there's an attempt to minimize the number, and statistics help achieve that perception that we may be a minority group in some countries. For example, the census of Colombia by a statistical trick, reduce the Afro-descendant population in Colombia by 30%. It was just a statistic tool. So there are many ways of kind of eliminating or denying our existence. So that recognition is very important. A point that Romero made is that we have to build an agenda. We have to set the agenda. No, we cannot allow others to set the agenda. One of my criticism of the Durban process is that there was a lot of money raised to support the conference and our participation. I mean, that's something that Lori Weisberg just wrote an article about it, documented how much money was raised. But most of the money was given to NGOs, most of them whites, that were really driving the process and not really strengthening our NGOs, our community-based organization that would then continue after the conference. So empowerment is really critical. Building strong organizations that are truly committed to transform our conditions, not just letting other organizations lead that process. I think that would be critical. And just another issue is that we must make sure that we can sustain that effort. And it's a very difficult challenge that we have ahead. We have to spend a lot of energy and time and building organizations, or even when you look at all the political advancements that were made after Durban, or the creation of all those ministries, etc., and they're all gone now. So, I mean, we really have to sustain, and maybe that route may not be the best one. I mean, the CEPID in Brazil is no longer what it was, the Sedinafro in Honduras, all those ministries are gone. So maybe we have to build alternative ways of advancing our struggle. And I just want to make one final comment. I think it's expanding what Chucho offers. The first conference against racism addressed the question of colonialism, and the second, the question of apartheid. But those are still challenges today. I mean, colonialism is still a challenge in the Caribbean islands that are colonials, or territories at some, at least the United States wants to use that term, that persists. In the Pacific, there are still colonies. So that's part of a challenge that we still have, and it should be part of our struggle. And that was something that we were bringing in the documents in Santiago and in Durban, reminding the world that the challenge is still there. And the second was about apartheid. And the situation of South Africa today really requires a lot of rethinking of where South Africa and Southern Africa is heading. Poverty levels are exceedingly high because they have not been able to implement a plan to overcome the legacy of apartheid and colonialism. So the inequalities, I mean, South Africa has the highest rate of inequality in the world. I mean, it's not just enough to have overcome apartheid, but the consequences are still there. So, I mean, the goals of the first World Conference are still our goals today, our challenges today. The same thing, the goals of the Second World Congress are still our challenges, and the goals of Durban are still part of our agenda. So we have to draw an agenda that can integrate all those goals and the new ones that are coming up. We still have to fight against colonialism. We have to fight for equality and integration, for gender equality, the issue of Black or women of African descent. It is a critical issue that we have to include very deliberately in our agenda. And those are some of the issues that at least my students here at the University of Puerto Rico and in Puerto Rico are raising. They are very keenly focusing on diversity as a demand. And they are very, in a way, confident because they found out that they could actually kick out a governor in 2019 because of the protest. They forced out a governor. So that empowered that generation, and it was quite an important experience that young people here have. But we have to go back to the drawing board, come with an agenda, strengthen our solidarity. We don't have to agree on everything, but we must support everyone, because too often our own infighting is part of the problem. So we have to really go back to the drawing board and draw an agenda to really overcome all these remaining challenges that are being faced by our peoples.
Thank you, Carmina. David, I would like you to address what's happening in Barbados in November, and then James will say some closing remarks because we're at the time.
What I would like to say is that,
because that's very hopeful.
yeah, I'm going to talk about that, but just let me make this comment that the World Conference Against Racism demonstrated to us that if we unite governments, Black governments, civil society, Pan-Africanists, that we can be very powerful in these multilateral institutions. The reason that the United States and Canada walked out of that conference is because they felt the combined power of the Black civil society in partnership with Caribbean and African governments. That's what happened at the World Conference. I was a governmental delegate right through, but I was a bridge between the Pan-African civil society organizers and the governments. So it was very much a partnership. We worked together and we demonstrated our strength. So that has always been a lesson for me that I have taken to heart, that once we are united in a cause that is just and right and righteous like this, that we have tremendous power. And of course, in countries in which Black people are numerical minorities, it is important to give those young people that sense that they're not isolated as minorities, that they're part of an international African structure that gives them solidarity and strength. In terms of Barbados, we are forging ahead. Barbados is moving ahead. We got rid of the Nelson statue last year. What was important was that there was no division. There was no division between government and people. Government and people together got rid of the Nelson statue. We are now making Barbados a republic. Basically what we are doing, we still had this old colonial tie to the monarchy of Britain, although we were independent, and we are getting rid of that old colonial tie. And so our ceremonial head of state will no longer be the British monarch. It will be one of our own Barbadian citizens. So we are moving. We are getting much closer to Africa. We just established an embassy in Kenya. We're establishing one in Ghana. We're going to establish one in Morocco as well. And so, those progressive developments are taking place. And it's important that our people in Latin America, in the United States, know about this, because, the Caribbean, because we have these Black governments, because we may be small, but we have Black governments that have a role on the international stage and in international organizations. It provides an opportunity for unity and for deploying Black strength internationally. So I just want to end by saying the Caricom Reparations Commission can be a kind of foundational institution that we can have, multiple interconnecting relationships that spread all across the world. I would be happy to be a bridge to make those introductions and connections. Thank you.
Excellent.
Well, we would be honored to be part of that, and we certainly feel, and I'm committing the group, right, that we will go to Barbados to make those connections as a group. James.
Marta, I want to give an opportunity. Romero Rodriguez has had his hand up.
Okay. Oh, I didn't see.
And
Sorry.
then I will.
Mhm.
Romero, tiene poco tiempo, entonces es su tiempo rápidamente, por favor.
A ver si entendí bien. Lo que Marta solicitaba era algunas ideas lluvias para una posible agenda. ¿Correcto?
Sí, y también es lo que dijo Palmira.
Okay.
Y ahora con lo que dijo David, vamos a ir a Barbados a hacer las conexiones con nuestro gobierno.
Bien, bien. Me parece bien esa línea que plantea. Ahora, me gustaría enfocar el tema de la sociedad civil, de las organizaciones, que fueron las que posibilitaron Durban. Yo creo que acá la agenda tenemos que tener una mirada atenta, un poco retomando con lo que decía Humberto, las sociedades, las organizaciones. Hace 20 años, hoy cumplimos 20 años de una realidad política totalmente diferente. Nosotros en Durban hicimos el ejercicio de poner encima del escenario mundial la situación de los negros, sujetos políticos afrodescendientes y las contradicciones que el sistema producía en ese momento, y de esas contradicciones las pudimos manejar y llevamos lo que muchos de los compañeros ya saben y han relatado. Ahora, el problema es muy diferente. ¿Cuál es modestamente la opinión de una agenda? Y una agenda es qué sociedad queremos vivir. Ese es el punto. Las organizaciones sociales, acá en Uruguay hay un gran debate de qué sociedad queremos vivir. Ese es el buen vivir, dicen los hermanos indígenas. ¿Cómo incentivamos y cómo articulamos con otros sectores, como se ha dicho acá, para generar un paradigma? Dicho de otra forma, superar Durban. Superar Durban. Con el aprendizaje de Durban, superarlo. Con el aprendizaje que hemos tenido, generar un nuevo paradigma, con las nuevas contradicciones que existen. Está esta contradicción, la tecnología. No a todas nuestras comunidades llega la tecnología. Hablaron de la pandemia y hablaron de otros fenómenos. Cuando se habla de los jóvenes, darle participación a los jóvenes en función de qué ellos plantean, cómo ven las contradicciones. No la ven igual que la veíamos hace 20 años. Hasta porque hace 20 años había una realidad mundial muy diferente. Era donde existía un tercer mundo que se hacía oír. Fidel Castro, estuvimos hablando, y otras realidades. América Latina cambió. Hoy hay un panorama que se llama neoliberalismo, que ataca directamente a nuestras comunidades. Por lo tanto, la agenda tiene que ir preguntarnos, puesto el sujeto político afrodescendiente, puesto nuestro enemigo central, el racismo estructural, institucional, etcétera, etcétera, ¿cuál es el desafío que tenemos? Y tener una agenda muy amplia a partir de las diversidades, de las contradicciones sociales, todas ellas, y construir desde ahí que la juventud obviamente va a opinar desde su óptica. Hay un mundo que reclama hoy la construcción de una agenda donde se acerque el Caribe, Latinoamérica con las nuevas realidades, superando Durban, no negando Durban, superándola. Hay una pregunta que en el Uruguay a veces la estamos discutiendo y en algunos foros. ¿Se puede continuar con la agenda de Durban o hay que superarla? Esa es una pregunta que con mucha honestidad intelectual no las tenemos que hacer. Se ha planteado ahora el foro permanente de afrodescendientes, una vieja reivindicación, todos y todas estamos muy contentos, pero ¿en qué cuadro político? En ese cuadro político que rechazó, donde Naciones Unidas ha actuado de una forma muy negativa, digo, no quiero nombrar acá las cosas que han sucedido. En esta América Latina, me refiero a la región, no puedo hablar, con mucho respeto, no puedo hablar de otras regiones, es lo que conozco, de donde vivo, donde en menos de 2 años hubieron 4 o 5 golpes de Estado y atacaron directamente a las comunidades negras. Ayer en Brasil, ayer nomás en Brasil, salieron 2 millones de personas a decir siga Bolsonaro. O sea, esas realidades políticas directamente nos implica a las comunidades más pobres, que son las comunidades afrodescendientes. Entonces nuestra agenda, imaginándome una agenda, es colocar encima de la mesa las contradicciones sociales que hoy aparecen con un sujeto político que se llama afrodescendiente. El sujeto político que se construyó hace 20 años, que ha tenido la mayoría de edad, donde planteó una serie de reivindicaciones, mostraban ahí los documentos de Durban. Bueno, ¿son capaces las nuevas generaciones? Yo pienso que sí. Ahora, el problema es que tenemos que tratar que esas contradicciones sociales que han aparecido en los últimos 10 años, las tenemos que construir en función de esta agenda que tiene que ser muy amplia, profundamente antirracista, profundamente el espíritu de Durban, sí, pero avanzando en otro Durban. He escuchado, me han escrito, he leído intelectuales que plantean la 4ª Conferencia Mundial contra el Racismo. Hay posibilidades reales, ciertas. No nos debemos preguntar eso, viejos y viejas compañeros. Digo, ese es el mundo que tenemos hoy, y al mundo que venimos. Por lo tanto, animarse a pensar, como lo hicimos hace 20 años, todo el movimiento social, el movimiento de mujeres, un movimiento revolucionario de transformación real. Digo, creo que la agenda para el Caribe, para América Latina, es construir, resumiendo las contradicciones sociales, las viejas y las nuevas que han aparecido.
Bueno, hermano,
Yo ya terminé, es eso, simplemente para tirar una propuesta de agenda, James.
Yo creo que es muy importante, que eso es clave, clave, son 20 años y uno tiene que retomar lo que está pasando ahora también.
Sí.
So, gracias, Romero, por introducir eso.
So we want to close with a brief commentary from Humberto and Gali, very brief. Romero has opened up a very important point of we are in a new moment in which to insert our old agenda of 20 years, but to update it in this new context. And so I'd like to get some brief closing comments from Humberto and then Gali, and then Marta and I will close out.
Jesús, that has organized so many conferences.
Mira, yo creo que totalmente de acuerdo con Romero y los planteamientos de que tenemos que entender el momento político. Y eso define quiénes son nuestros aliados, qué son las propuestas y cómo avanzamos. Pero yo creo que también quiero llamar la atención de que nosotros, el documento Durban, que nunca se hizo un documento popular de educación, quedó resumido en estructuras burocráticas. Nunca se transformó, y yo creo que hay que diferenciar la diferencia entre sociedad civil, que es un término muy neoliberal, para empezar, y los movimientos sociales reales en nuestros países. Hay una diferencia entre ONG y movimientos sociales, que yo creo que Cali Okuno, cuando hablaba de eso, hablaba, cuando ellos vinieron a Durban, vinieron como movimientos sociales, con agenda política, identificados con propuestas políticas, y no solamente como un asunto O sea, yo creo que tenemos que, y quiero terminar con esto, Durban está vigente en la práctica social de las luchas hoy. El movimiento en contra de la violencia a los jóvenes en todo el mundo está definido en Durban como una de las plataformas muy importantes de dar el encarcelamiento de los negros, de criminalizar a nuestra gente por la pobreza. Y hoy, lo que pasó en los Estados Unidos con George Floyd y lo que se movilizó al mundo Esa es parte de la agenda de Durban. Nos toca a nosotros traducir, conectar, vincular eso, porque en la realidad eso está en lucha. Y eso yo nada más quiero contribuir. Yo creo que Durban está en vivo, es cómo nosotros lo vinculamos. Yo enseño educación y salud. Los médicos, los estudiantes de salud hoy discuten racismo como parte esencial, social determinante, pobreza. Ese no es el médico ni el educador de salud pública de hace 30 años. Entienden los problemas sociales. Somos nosotros que tenemos que vincular esas instancias y movilizarlo. Yo creo que los jóvenes no están tan perdidos. Yo creo que hay una agenda común. Yo creo que Romero lo presentó. Si yo diría que hay algo común en los Estados Unidos y en el resto de Latinoamérica, que la estructura de poder tradicional, el capitalismo, predator, ya no se puede sustentar en la forma que está. Ni las asambleas, ni los judiciales, porque los pueblos se sienten invisibilizados, marginalizados, no representan nada a la cotidianidad de vida. Somos nosotros que tenemos que convertir eso, lo que decía Romero y Chucho, en una agenda política viable en el siglo XXI, que vincula el pasado y el presente y construye el futuro unido con esos otros sectores.
Excelente, hermano. Gracias. Kali, Akuno, you have to unmute.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's a ton to say. I appreciate. I didn't catch all of what you said, Humberto. I got to brush up on my Spanish. I don't get much opportunity to practice in Jackson, Mississippi, especially since Chucho hasn't been to visit us in a while. But that said, our agenda is over a 500-year one. I don't think just saying there's a 20-year one or that we got to revive it. We got a 500-year agenda, and until those accounts are settled with, those issues are going to remain on our collective agenda throughout the diaspora and throughout the continent. I think the fundamental question in the here and now is the strategies to make in certain places, right? The United States, where I'm at being one, how to make some of our core issues mass issues again. Now there's some level of mass discussion about reparations in the United States. Some want to attribute that to Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's been going on long before then. It had been building long before then. We respect that contribution, but it's still not, I think, as critical enough. And I think in the same way that what I mean by that, in the same way that David was really defining kind of what the focus should be, we still need to have that level of detailed conversation and clarity about what we want going forward with all its variants. I think to be able to galvanize all the different sectors of our people and our movement to make it a mass orientation again, and then be very clear about the strategic outline that he set up, because it's that he outlined. It's very clear to me. That was one of the critical lessons going into it 20 years ago. I didn't think the level of coordination that, say, Du Bois and Robeson and Malcolm were hoping for and aspiring for with the United Nations and our people's movements could be possible. That was a moment that demonstrated, yes, it is possible. We have to recreate those conditions, and that is where the social movements have to take the lead, not the state governments, because they can't do that. Not in the way that the world is presently situated with the balance of forces. We have to press the agenda. We have to move it, and that's why the mass movements everywhere, I think, are critical. Now, I agree with Rosa that, at least with a lot of youth I work with, see some aspects of the future as very bleak, but also know that they were just out in the streets, continuously last year, fighting for a just future. Both of these positions can be held at the same time, and I think it's our task and our duty to keep having forums like this and other organizing and educational work to bridge the work from the past, the documents of the past, the positions of the past, the alliances of the past, to resurrect them, to be able to build our power going forward. I think, without question, because of the climate calamity, because of the social calamity that's just now really trying to accelerate in the political calamity with the right gaining strength in many places in the world. There's some very serious kind of open cleavages that we can step into. And that this is the opportunity for us to move, right? Revolutionary forces for us to move into just as much as the right is move into the challenges of getting us organized to be able to exercise our full capacity. And that is where I think we're at and what the peace going forward requires.
Thank you, Kali. Chucho, 2 minutos, no más.
For me, I am okay, and I am very glad. Yo estoy muy contento porque después de 20 años estamos incidiendo no con una agenda de la nostalgia, sino con una agenda hacia adelante, y eso es importante con todo lo que ha dicho Romero, Humberto, Palmira, Marta, tú mismo, Jane, etcétera, ¿no? Yo sugiero 4 puntos esenciales. Primero, una necesaria reconexión de los movimientos afro en su diversidad, los puntos de coincidencia, para lo cual sugiero en este momento 3 puntos. 1, la necesidad de transversalizar los 17 objetivos del milenio con los 3 principios del decenio. Eso es esencial. Segundo, el tema de las reparaciones. Eso es fundamental, lo que está pasando en Colombia, con casi la recuperación de 6 millones de hectáreas, encabezada por el proceso de comunidades negras, así como están las 6.000 quilombolas, por ejemplo, en Brasil, o así como se está resistiendo los garífunas en Honduras. Eso es esencial. Y por último, la necesidad de hacer una rediscusión, como decía Humberto, como coincidía Romero, sobre el tema del fondo. ¿Cómo concibimos el fondo? Ya que está en proceso, que se está cocinando. Esas son las 4 sugerencias que hago como propuesta de una agenda hacia adelante. Muchas gracias.
Marta.
Bueno, I think I said what I felt. We're going to go to Barbados and we're going to connect, because I think one of the key things is that Puerto Rico needs to connect as Santo Domingo and the Spanish-speaking countries. We have to connect the Caribbean, the English-speaking and French-speaking, and all of our colonial languages, including the US, together. We see ourselves as separate. And my mama, my great-grandmother could have landed in Barbados, in Trinidad, or in the United States, right? And we're still gathering that information, so that it's incumbent upon us to see ourselves globally and not see ourselves as individuals, right? But to see ourselves as part of the global family. And we need to organize local, national, and internationally. And I think this is an opportunity in selecting, the participants, because there's so many participants that could have been selected because we were all in Durban at the same time. But James and I wanted to get sort of a spectrum of what was present, so that we could begin to sort of plan how we move forward in unison, in ways that, as Romero is saying, the times now call for, right? Because the challenges we're having now are not that different than before, but strategies being used are very different, right? And who would have thought that in the United States, voter suppression would have been an issue at the level that it is now, right? That a woman would not be able to determine what she wants to do with her body, right? And the Supreme Court of these United States upheld something that should be, and I'm not a lawyer, but sounds unconstitutional. So we're facing issues, right, that are coming to us in a different way, and we have to find different ways of addressing it together. So that what Palmira was saying, connecting with what Romero was saying, we have to see what the moment of now brings us to, right? And we have to bridge that gap between what's happening in different generations, because we can't get into that sort of Western European mentality of, and I hate when I hear millennia, you know, and people saying, well, the millennium are acting like this. Our kids don't have a right to act in a certain way because they have a history and they have to uphold and dignify that history, not by acting like a little dumb, and, you know, sort of, I don't want to say that, acting sort of like under a label that has been put on them for commercial purposes. But they have to honor that past and honor our future. And certainly it's on all of us to act together, not separately and in different silos. So I'm so excited by what's happening in Barbados. And I make the commitment on the part of Creative Justice and Corredor Afro and all of us that are working together to bring a group together in November to make that connection with David.
Okay, possibly because yo soy el viejo de Estefanel, I've got the last few words. Just before 8:30, it's 8:26. I'm just thinking of an afro-lesbiana izquierdista, una citación de ella. Nosotros somos los que estábamos esperando. We're the ones we've been waiting for. I'm thinking of June Jordan, the afro-lesbian leftist who linked both the United States, the Caribbean and Latin America, and the entire globe as a revolutionary. We are the ones who have inherited the 500-year agenda that Kali Akuno points out. I noted that this is also a crisis of neoliberal capitalism. That context is one in which we live. There is no parallel universe for Black freedom. We are the transversal link to the full expression of democracy and the development, not only of ourselves, but of other sectors of our societies. If we do not advance, they will not advance. That has proven to be the case, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the United States, whether it's Colombia. The Caribbean is, I think, a prime example. Across the Afro-English-speaking Caribbean, citizens are organized from various ideological perspectives around the topic of reparations. It is not just the governments, the sons and daughters from those households who become the government, but it is ordinary citizens who have also pushed their governments to do that. That is a plus that we have to build on. And I would conclude by saying that we have to pay attention to this crisis of neoliberal capitalism because it is literally killing us and indigenous people. And in that context, women, working class and rural women with children in particularly are the victims of this crisis. And so that when Caricom moves into the United Nations to raise these issues, we have to hold China accountable as well. This must be on their agenda. We have to hold Russia accountable. It must be on their agenda. And finally, we have mentioned Fidel Castro, who gave an extraordinary speech in Durban, but I don't recall that in one instance, the internal dynamics of Cuba were mentioned. He gave a brilliant speech on the history of racism and colonialism, but nothing about the internal dynamics of Cuba, in which today, in my dear socialist Cuba, which I claim as a socialist, the issue of racism is not just one issue, it is a transversal issue for the development of that socialist revolution. If that question is not addressed in collaboration with Afro-Cuban patriots who are progressives, socialists, and communists, that revolution will not take its next step. I think this is the context in which we insert ourselves into the center of global cultural, political, socioeconomic activity. Marta, thank you once again for convening us. And I really want to applaud you for all of the work that you continue to do to be a bridge to bring us together. And I look forward to Ambassador David Camasong welcoming us in Barbados in November. Good evening.
Thank you all for answering the call. David, you wanted to say something before we sign off?
I was telling James to bring Danny with him, you know, Danny Glover. Yeah, all you guys should come. Yeah,
listen, we will come if we can have some fried flying fish. If any of you are fried fish lovers, wait until you get to Barbados and get that fried flying fish. It is the most distinctive and beautiful taste that I'm a great fried fish lover. So we look forward to that.
Well, David, you need to tell us if that's the right time to come. I'm imposing it on it just because you said this wonderful event is happening. But whatever the right time is the time that we'll go.
30th of November. Everything would climax on the 30th of November.
The 30th? Oh, good.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll get there a little before so we can be part of the event and then we can plan and talk.
I know.
Okay. So that's a commitment. We're going.
Good night. And be
Okay.
safe.
Good night, all. And thank you for answering
Bye-bye.
the call.
Bye.